When we look at the legacy of Marcus Garvey, we see again an emphasis on productivity. Marcus Garvey did not have to read Engels, Marx, and Lenin, even though he was familiar with them. He did not have to read those to recognize the intimate relationship between the means of production and the character of a people, to recognize the intimate relationship between the nature of the economic relationships of people and their social relationships one with the other. It was apparent in his observing of our people across the world. He recognized, as we must recognize, that social character to a significant extent is determined by the nature of social relations and of labor relations. He recognized ultimately that the eating at lunch counters with our enemies, the sharing of hotels and beds with those enemies, the marrying and sleeping with their daughters would not advance our interests ultimately as a people. That consuming their products would not ultimately rescue us from subordination. Ultimately, freedom and independence is founded on production, upon the creation of employment, upon the creation of labor, and the creation of products for our own consumption. When we look in the world today, we will see that the powerful nations and the powerful people are producing people, not consuming people. As I've often said, you cannot consume yourself into equality. You cannot consume yourself into power. Those nations who depend upon consumption will see that as they consume the products of others and do not produce themselves, they will be consumed by others. We see that now happening right here in the so-called United States of America. We hear the people now in Congress and other places belly aching about how the Japanese closed out their markets and how we cannot sell in the Japanese markets, but how the Japanese invade this market. The economists now know that this country is living on borrowed time, that it is spending beyond its means, that its so-called Reagan prosperity is a bogus prosperity that is dependent upon the input of foreign nations, that Japan, to a good extent, along with a couple of other nations, is financing the consumption habits of the United States. And at some point, we are going to have to face a moment of truth. And we, as African people, must recognize that we are going to be caught in the very jaws of this moment. Because this kind of economic relationship cannot continue forever. We've seen evidence of it this week where tariffs were imposed or shall be imposed upon Japanese products. We have seen a wholesale stripping of the United States of its industrial base. The Midwest is now called the Rust Belt because industries have literally flown outside of the country and the nation. I was looking the other evening at the so-called decrease in unemployment. And yet when you look at that decrease in unemployment, you see it in the so-called service areas. You see the so-called increase of jobs in the areas of the McDonald's and the Bojangles, but not in the areas of manufacture. As a matter of fact, there is a continuing decline in the area of manufacture in this country. So we have a superficial ideology that's built around service and service industries, but not around productivity. And now this white man is recognizing that in this nation, he has got to do something about it, or else he will fade. And we as a people must recognize as well that we cannot move forward based on consumption. we must produce and outproduce our enemies. That is our ultimate salvation. No other thing will do. And that was a legacy that Marcus Garvey left us, and left us very strongly, that we must engage in productive labor, productive growth and development if we were to, and if we are to survive. Looking at these few statements in regard to the legacy of Marcus Garvey, there must be in some of your minds the question then, did it succeed? Or why are we in the state that we are in today? And I must frankly say I am somewhat disturbed by the fact that to a degree, even though certainly the spirit of Marcus Garvey lives in the hearts of many of us, it has not manifested itself as much as it should have and as much as it can. As a matter of fact, when we look at our situation today, we see an actual decline in Black economic development, not only in this country, but in the world in general. And we have been witnessing in the last few years, even in this country, a backward slide in our economic and political development. What happened in terms of the legacy of Marcus Garvey? Certainly there can be many reasons for that now. Just look at a couple. One of them, of course, I believe, was and is the ascendancy of the assimilationist, the integrationist. Those leaders who came and tried to project an unreal hope that we could advance the interests of our people by identifying with the destinies of our enemies. A people who try to get us to forget our color and to forget our African heritage. A suppression of those of us who try to maintain our African identity and our African destiny. When you couple that kind of leadership with a few concessions by the establishment, with a type of prosperity, economic prosperity, that made an appearance in the 50s and maintained itself through the 60s, you had a combination then that worked against the interests of the nationalist organizations and the nationalist ideology. We saw a national and neo-colonialist leadership that fell for the delusions of the so-called establishment in the system, and has misled the people into thinking then that their ultimate salvation is that of identifying and becoming one with their oppressors.